Good morning, everybody. My name is Ryota Jonen, and I'm the director of the World Movement for Democracy. And I'm very excited to be here today to make some announcement. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce my co-panelists here. On my right, we have Nishan Bolton of Ahmed Kothrada Foundation. Far right, we have Daniel Ngwepe of In Transformation Initiative. We have here, my left, Legotsofete Chikane of Defend Our Democracy. Online, we do have two members, Colette Letorgene of Hurisa and Granes Changachere of Zimbabwe. She's also a steering committee member of the World Movement for Democracy. So she'll be coming in a few minutes. Here's what I'd like to do today. I'll give you an overview of what we are planning to do in November, which we'd like to make an announcement on. And then we invite our partners from South Africa to say a few words about why we are having this event in November. And then we'll bring Granes Changachere online from Zimbabwe to talk about why this is important for global challenges we're facing today. So first, let me tell you a little bit about the World Movement for Democracy. The World Movement for Democracy is a global community of democracy advocates, civil society activists, human rights defenders, practitioners like Member of Parliament, and other political actors, scholars coming together in solidarity to advance democracy. And we do so by facilitating peer learning, building solidarity, and mobilizing political and public support. And we do this in the three main areas. One, expanding civic and political space. Second, promoting and advancing inclusive governance. And then third, cultivating next generation of democracy leaders. We do all of this through different convenings, facilitating discussions, providing mentorship, and we very much rely on our local partners to help us advance our community. One of the biggest things that we do is every 2 years, we convene our community, 400, 500 people from different parts of the world, coming together in one place for 3 days to really put our heads together to deepen the common understanding of what we are facing, the challenges that we're facing, and co-create the strategy to overcome those challenges. Now, we were here in February at the Nelson Mandela Foundation with my chairperson of the World Movement Steering Committee, Maria Ressa, who is also, by the way, the 2021 Nobel Peace Laureate. We made an announcement that we are coming here in South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa, in November, next month, to hold the 12th Global Assembly of the World Movement for Democracy. We're bringing 500 plus people from 100 different countries. In part, we want to come here to celebrate the 30 years of South African democracy, because it's been the global inspiration for all of us globally. But second, it is really timely for South Africa to host such an event because of what happened this year in South Africa. And I don't think I have a right to talk about what happened in South Africa. I invite our partners from South Africa to tell you why this is relevant today, not only historically, but today. So we made an announcement in February, but we have some updates that I thought we'll come here to share information on. Second, the 12th Global Assembly of the World Movement for Democracy is going to take place on November 20th through 22nd. It's going to be a 3-day conference under the theme of Revitalizing Democracy, Reflection, Resilience, and Innovation. And the 3-day agenda is consisting of basically the 3 different pillars. One, how do we expand civic and political space in the challenging moment that we are facing today? How do we build a pro-democracy, pro-right movement narrative? We are seeing the battle of narratives all around. So how do we overcome that challenge? And then finally, how do we outsmart autocrats through digital innovation, or political innovation that we are seeing here in South Africa in different places. And I'd like to announce some of the speakers that we've been able to confirm. So we have two Nobel Peace laureates coming. Maria Ressa from 2021 from the Philippines. Second, Alexander Matvichuk, 2022 Nobel Peace Laureate from Ukraine. We also have a former president of Tunisia, Monsef Mazuki. Aisha Youssefou of Nigeria, she's been the leader of Bring Back Our Girls movement in Nigeria. From South Africa, we also have Matthew Posa, Dr. Posa, and Rolf Meyer, the chief negotiator from the National Party in the 90s. Dr. Posa and Mr. Meyer will be having a conversation about and reflecting on what the type of negotiations they went through to create a pathway forward for the new democratic South Africa. We are very much excited about that particular conversation. We also have young South African leaders coming to actually share their thoughts. For example, Mbari Ntuli of Groundwork Collective from KwaZulu-Natal, sharing her thoughts on what democracy means in South Africa today. So these are some of the featured speakers that we wanted to make an announcement today. But I want to tell you that assembly is not just about intellectual provoking conversation and practical strategizing sessions, but it is also designed to really help non-South African and South African participants to interact and engage on learning from each other. And we provide a space like that through holding this global assembly at Freedom Park. As you know, the Freedom Park is a very open air, very spiritual place, really memorializing the heritage of South Africa. So we thought that it was a perfect place to start the global assembly at the Freedom Park. And I'm happy to announce today, and this is something that our South African partners do not know yet, the music group, Mafikizolo, has confirmed to make a performance for our democracy community. And they've been part of this democracy movement here as well. So we're very excited to have Mafikizolo with us on the opening day on November 20th. We're expecting this conference to produce few things. Through the conversations, plenary sessions, workshops, interactions, and so on, we're hoping to have much more articulated vision for democratic future, because democratic future cannot be taken for granted these days. And the second, we hope that we help catalyze some of the collaborations and efforts that we are seeing in different parts of the world. Different movements are competing for international attention. Instead of competing for the attention, we want to create a space for collaboration. And this is what the democracy, World Movement for Democracy is about. So we are creating a space for them to share the stories. I'll tell you a little bit more about democracy courage tributes to express the global solidarity after my colleagues, my friends who will speak. So let me just stop here and let me invite Dr. Chikane to share his thoughts on this global assembly.
Hi, everyone. Again, thanks for having us. We're very, very excited for the Global Assembly as Defend Our Democracy. It's been something that has been in the works for over a year now at this point. And it's very exciting to finally see it coming together. And we're only 1 month away, which is crazy to think of. So I've got a few thoughts, but most of them are written down on behalf of DOD. And I think it's quite important in different ways. So as DOD, me in particular, earlier, last week, a 19-year-old Shaban Al-Dalu, an engineer student in Gaza, was burnt alive in his tent while connected to an IV drip. He was killed in an Israeli bomb blast in a hospital, and the images of him writhing in flames engulfed him were shared worldwide. As a young South African, it rekindles memories of another young man, Hector Peterson, just 13 years old in 1976, taken to the streets in a peaceful protest by school children Peterson was amongst those shot dead by the apartheid police. The image of his body being carried by his sister and fellow school pupil was published in other parts of the world, but South Africans at the time remained largely unaware of it. Today, it stands part of the Hector Peterson Memorial in Soweto for all to see. It also reminds me of just earlier this year, activists in Kenya actively fighting for the right to participate in their democracy and being shot down in a democratic country for voicing their opinions. And if it wasn't for the young activists there, that a lot of them also wouldn't have been heard. I raise these examples because they're relevant for the moment that the world finds itself in. It's a world characterized by the rise of proto-fascist political parties, alarming incidences of racism and xenophobia, growing concerns of hunger, famine, and climate-related disasters, corruption and organized crime, war, conflict, and worse off in Palestine, genocide and apartheid. Despite the immense gains made through democracy in various countries around the world, there is ample evidence that democracy and democratic practices cannot be taken for granted. In November this year, Defend Our Democracy will be supporting the 12th Global Assembly of the World Movement for Democracy. The assembly will be held in South Africa as it marks 30 years of democracy. For our organization, it presents an important moment, an opportunity to bring together democracy activists from around the globe to put our minds together on how to enhance and protect the gains of democracy. South Africans often think we are exceptional when it comes to democratic building, when in fact, many countries have been doing it, and there's many lessons that we can share with others and that we can learn from others. And I think this platform becomes that important space for South African activists to really engage with the rest of the globe, to really get a sense of where is the world going at this current stage. Especially within the context of a South African democracy that has the lowest voter turnout in its electoral history after the 2024 elections, which has indicated that young people are becoming disillusioned about our democracy. This is complemented by a worrying trend in our country that 2/3 of South Africans would be willing to forego democracy if they were able to have an authoritarian leader who would get the job done. So in all of this, how do we reinvigorate general interest and in particular youth interest in democracy? Well, for DOD, this can only happen if the discussions and debates that we have about democracy are honest and frank. We cannot talk about democracy globally or in South Africa in the abstract. It should be tangible, it should be real. Democracy and its principles of justice, accountability, transparency, and the delivery of services must mean something practically for people's everyday lives. And in South Africa, democracy must come to mean the implementation of our constitution and to end corruption and state capture, provide services for our people, create the jobs for the unemployed, and create leaders who are accountable. It must mean a better way of life and more opportunities so that a 13-year-old school children today in Soweto do not have to worry about where their next meal may be coming from or whether in a few years, even while they live in a democracy, they wouldn't be able to access an education at a university level or get a job that allows them to make ends meet. For 19-year-old Shaban Al-Dalu, the promise of freedom, democracy, and sovereignty was an empty one. In a world where universal human rights should be the underpinning of a democratic order, he has failed along with thousands of others in Palestine, Sudan, Myanmar, Ukraine, and Western Sahara. We hope that the Global Assembly this year ensures that discussions about democracy focuses not only on protecting democratic gains, but also about holding accountable those who violate democratic principles and our human rights. Our discussions, which I'm very excited for, at this year's Global Assembly, must help turn the tide against growing threats to democracy, but must also ultimately come to mean something for many young people across the world whose vision for hope has been obscured by the fires that seek to burn them. Thank you.
Can I ask Colette to come online and share her thoughts? Colette, please. Oh, hi, Colette.
Good morning. I hope I'm clear. Good morning, everyone. And it is an honor and privilege to join this August meeting today, a meeting that is giving the highlights of the purpose of the 12th Assembly that is going to be conducted in South Africa. I am honored to be one of the speakers, to be part of the steering committee local group in South Africa that is assisting the partners from abroad to set up a very good process. For me, I think I am so honored because I have been exposed to the Global Assembly since 2004, when they first started exposing us to in South Africa. I think during that year, which was the 10th anniversary, which was observed at that time, I think it really increased our understanding of what is a democracy. It assisted in strengthening the civil society to work together to promote human rights and our all organs that are supporting democracy in South Africa. My experience as well was in part as well in 2018 when I saw the excellent work that was done by the World Movement on Democracy in Senegal, Dakar. Activists from around the world gathered in this country, bringing together their differences, their challenges, and also exchanging of best practices, the lessons that we were all sharing. And it was very touching to see how human rights defenders and civil society, operate in very hostile environment. And also those that were sharing how their governments were not respecting democratic principles, those that were not even, persecuting those that are exposing malpractice, bad governance. It was an opportunity as well to bring in human rights bodies such as the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and special mandate holders at the UN that also shared their experience and empowered the civil society. For us, we accelerated our work, and we are now a support group member on the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, focusing on freedom of association and assembly. We had a site event there. During this site event, we collaborated with the International Law Center, ICNL. In this gathering, we were able to promote Article 10 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights that speaks about state parties, enact laws that are progressive, that enable civic space, that enable participation of civil society and the public in democracy. We were able to draw principles that were advocated at the African Commission level. We currently have the guidelines on freedom of association and assembly. The guidelines are guiding state parties to develop laws that are progressive. I don't have any doubt that the gathering in South Africa, it will do exactly that. It will ensure that the civil society that live or operate under hostile environment, that are experiencing repression, that are advocating against laws, restrictive laws, that are impeding on their work, on their environment, on their organizations, they receive support and they open up in sharing their experience. I see a process that is even adding value onto South Africa, a country that has just recently set up a body that is setting a precedent for countries to follow coalition government. And we are excited that in this conversation, we will even receive more support, we'll receive even more recognition for the precedent that we have set up in our governance. And I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Colette. And thank you for reminding us that we were here in 2004. So this is really the second time that we come back bringing the global community to South Africa, and we're very much excited that we can do this twice. Now, may I ask Daniel Ngobe to share his thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you, Roy. And congratulations to you and the local organizers for the work you've put in towards arranging this global assembly that's taking place next month. My name is Daniel. I come from the organization called the ITI. For those that may not be familiar with it, ITI stands for In Transformation Initiative. And it was founded by directors who mostly were involved with South Africa's transition from apartheid in the early 90s. The work that we do at the moment is to support societies in transition, both in South Africa and outside of the country. We do work in Myanmar, in the Central African Republic, for instance, in the Sudan, in Cameroon, in Zimbabwe, in Palestine, drawing on South Africa's truth and reconciliation experience. And so we're very excited as well to be associated with this event, with the Global Assembly, with the 12th Global Assembly. Primarily, I think as my colleagues here have said, because while we this year celebrate South Africa's 30 years of democracy, democracy is not just about enjoying the freedoms and having our rights protected and respected. It's also about access to public goods. When we look around, the quality of education, which is the future of our children, should be improved. When we look around, access to clean water, access to breathing clean air, those values should never change. And therefore, while we celebrate 30 years of democracy, we also recognize that as a country, we are not yet on the downside of the mountain. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in order to address the pesky inequalities in our communities. And so we believe as ITI in the importance of dialogue. A lot of what the geopolitical developments are pointing out is that in our democracy, the democratic systems indeed may be at risk, and it is important for organizations such as ourselves to keep an eye on things, to make sure that we don't take our foot off the accelerator in terms of keeping attention and focus on developments that may be putting democracies at risk. It is indeed recognizable that this is going to be held in South Africa, a country of two realities, one where this could be a first world existence, but this could also be a third world existence. And South Africa still has that moral authority to contribute to what's going on geopolitically in the world. And so, Ryota, we are also excited to be supportive to the work that you will be doing here, and we hope that the legacy, when this conference is over, that when you leave, South Africa will continue to build resilient communities, that we will keep our foot, as I say, on the accelerator, because we don't do it just for ourselves, we do it for our neighbors, we do it for the African continent. We hope that as much as we learn from the folks that will be participating here, that we also have lessons to share with the rest of the world. And with that, I will hand back the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. Now, may I invite Nisham, please.
Thanks, Ryota. Like my colleagues here, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation is very proud to be part of this initiative in terms of welcoming the 500 or more delegates to South Africa. Just as an aside, I think it kicks off our tourism season in a way that might not have been anticipated. But my contribution is to say that I was part of a World Movement for Democracy event in Sarajevo at the end of May. And what I learned from people who came from across the Middle East and North Africa there was that there were so many aspects of South African democracy that we take for granted, but which in many parts of the world people would actually die for. Let me just cite a few examples. In many of those countries, insulting a president would either be a death sentence, or you would have to leave, or you would go to jail. In this country, fortunately, you can still do it. You can shout at the president on Twitter and social media and so forth without very little repercussions. We have a judiciary that by and large has been a bulwark against all threats to democracy. We are mindful that all of that I'm going to say, these strengths are not permanent. These guardrails of democracy requires continuous monitoring, continuous support, and strengthening. We have a constitution that many of the people in that hall were just in awe of, because that constitution talks about things that they dream about in many of those countries. And those countries ranged from Afghanistan to Zambia, to Uganda, to Tunisia, where many of those activists, democracy activists, have to do their work from outside of their country as people in exile. We have a media year that many of them can only hope for. With its own challenges, it is still a major strength of South Africa's democracy. The other major strength of this country's democracy is religious freedom. And it didn't strike me just how much that is something we take for granted until I heard the experiences of Muslims in Sarajevo. And even though there has been change, they live with constant fear, and other religious minorities. The elections in South Africa, we've just had our last one, by and large are free and fair, but we've seen signs of people contesting it, as they have done in the US, and there are ongoing issues around that contestation, which our electoral body will have to deal with. We have credible elections management. So there's lots to celebrate about 30 years of democracy. But I hope when the delegates come, that we also look at our democracy and many of its weaknesses. This is still the most unequal country in the world. We have, as Ryota has said, declining electoral participation and a growing kind of appeal of authoritarian rule. And that on its own must make us very worried. There's a growing right-wing conservatism, and there has been government failure and huge grand corruption in this country, which I hope the delegates will be made aware of and will also engage. 30 years ago, we brought in our democracy year in 1994. But at the same time, Rwanda was going through a genocide. The world was silent then. As we mark this 30 years here in South Africa, we have a genocide happening in Palestine. And this assembly cannot be silent about that genocide and other atrocities in other parts of the world. We need to learn the lessons from the silence that emboldened the Nazis in the 1930s and understand the consequences of that. As I move to conclude, the World Movement for Democracy and all of us who are associated with it are going to face challenges and critics who have perceptions of the World Movement for Democracy and its key funder, the National Endowment Fund. Those will have to be engaged with and refuted, or evidence presented to back up those claims. And I leave that to yourselves, Ryota. What I do want to say, however, is that American democracy itself must come under scrutiny, perhaps not in this assembly, but that the world movement for democracy needs to also turn its spotlight into the weaknesses of American democracy. Agenda 2024 poses a threat not only to America, but to the rest of South Africa. I want to just conclude with just reading a... Just give me 1 second. I can't find this thing now. Democracy, however, is something... Democracy dies today not in the old style through coups, but they die through the takeover of democracy and democratic institutions by those who have undemocratic intentions. It's the subversion of democracy from within that this global assembly needs to be mindful of. I want to just conclude with this revised version of the poem of Pastor Martin Niemöller. It says, first they came for the hospitals, and you did not speak out, except to say they wouldn't, and anyway, the tunnels. Then they came for 5-year-old Hind, who you did not speak out, except to say, regrettable, but anyway, hostages. Then they came for journalists, professors, poets, and you did not speak out, except to say, awful, but right to self-defense. They came for schools, mosques, aid workers, anyone in the sight of a sniper, and you did not speak out, except to say, yeah, but the most moral army. Now they come for starving people in tents and burn them, and you do not speak out. You do not speak out, you never speak out. When they come for you, expect nothing but silence. And that, I think, is the challenge for all who will gather here in South Africa at the end of November. Thank you.
And now you heard from the 4 of our partner organizations. We have established what we called a coordination committee for the Global Assembly planning. So we from the World Movement of Democracy based in Washington, D.C., at the National End of Democracy, we work with 6 organizations in this coordination committee. So we have here Ahmed Kothrada Foundation, Defend Our Democracy, Human Rights Institute of South Africa, HURISA, in Transformation Initiative. But we also have Ronnie Mapweva Foundation and the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. They work together and help guide various issues for us and working in collaboration to inform the agenda, inform South African issues, so that we can integrate into the Global Assembly agenda. Now, yes, it is a challenging moment for democracy globally. We are seeing the rise of violent war and conflict. Tens of thousands of people have been killed in Palestine, Sudan, Myanmar, so many other places that our participants are coming from. We are going to have 5 Palestinians, 3 Sudanese, maybe 7 from Burma, several from Uganda. They are all struggling, and they have been forefront of the global democracy struggle. And we have opportunity to really facilitate global learning for everybody and build a solidarity with them. To represent the global solidarity voice, we do have what we call steering committee. Steering committee is the body, guiding body, advisory body for world movement. It is chaired by Maria Ressa of the Philippines. But here today, we have Granes Changachere from Zimbabwe. And she's been part of the Global Assembly and the World Movement of Democracy for many, many years, and she'd like to share her experience. Granes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Thank you for joining us.
You are welcome, and thank you so much for having me. I am seeing that there seems to be a delay in the relay of the message, so I will try to slow down on my speech so that you do not miss part of what I'm going to share. My name is Gladys Changachirere. I'm sitting here today, wearing two jackets as the steering committee member of the World Movement for Democracy, as Ryota said, and also as the team leader or director of the Institute for Young Women Development, a youth-driven feminist organization promoting the advancement of democracy among grassroots communities in Zimbabwe. I joined the World Movement for Democracy as a young woman activist working to advance the participation of young women and grassroots communities in democracy promotion in Zimbabwe. As democracy and human rights promoters, I'm sure many of you would agree with me that in countries like Zimbabwe and other repressive contexts, we often face insurmountable challenges. I personally have faced arrests as a young woman in university for daring to ask for democracy, for daring to call for the respect of young women and their freedoms in Zimbabwe. This situation left me isolated from my family because they were scared of the work that I was doing to advance democracy. And it also isolated me from many other people that were very important to me because they feared that associating with me would also make them vulnerable to arrests and intimidation. These challenges do not only make us vulnerable as human rights activists and our families, but they also affect our own mental health. However, being part of the World Movement for Democracy, connecting with other people around the world who believe in democracy has helped me to build a community of support and solidarity. The global assemblies that I have attended have always helped to share practical knowledge and tools among many of us in the world who care about democracy that we can use in the organizations that we are coming from and the different countries that we are coming from that also face different forms of repression. The 12th Global Assembly that we are having in South Africa this November offers such a space where we can share knowledge about innovative ideas of how we can continue to advance democracy, particularly in challenging times that we are facing, not only as countries that have got repressive political systems, but because of the challenges that we are facing all around the world today. Global challenges and increasingly transnational challenges for democracy, human rights, and governance that works for people characterizes our lives today. The contestations about immigration relations between Zimbabwe and South Africa today cannot be discussed outside the conversation of democracy in the two respective countries. The democratic deficits exemplified by the situations we continue to find in Sudan today, what is happening in Palestine, Ukraine, and many other countries around the world, and the role that each and every one of us who believe and act to advance democracy around the world cannot be underestimated. There could not be any other better place to hold the 12th Global Assembly than in South Africa in the year 2024. South Africa offers a practical and symbolic story about democracy. 30 years of democracy, 3 decades of successive functional democracy in Southern Africa tells a story about how South Africa has navigated the space of democracy and ensured freedoms and fundamental rights for its citizens. Whether that is achieved as the South Africans' perspectives or expectations or not is a different conversation altogether. But the space that South Africa's democracy has offered for its people for 30 years is completely different from a space that we have been offered in Zimbabwe since we gained independence. And hence, there would be no any other place to have critical conversations about democracy, particularly focusing at how to revitalize democracy through stories of resilience building, through reflection of what has worked and what has not worked and what is it that we need to rethink, and thinking about how to innovate in order to continue to advance democracy around the world, a world that seemed to be fatigued about the conversation of democracy. As a Zimbabwean activist, I say to South Africa, do not take your democracy for granted. And as a steering committee member of the World Movement for Democracy, I say I am excited to be in South Africa for the 12th Global Assembly in 2024. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, South Africa has been a recipient of international solidarity for the anti-apartheid struggle. Today, South Africa has been sharing the solidarity, building the solidarity with others in different parts of the world, as Daniel mentioned, through the work of ITI and so many other groups. Global Assembly is also a place where we share, build solidarity with so many movements who are demonstrating extraordinary courage these days. And I'm sure you can think of so many in your head. But steering committee members got together earlier this year and have decided to give 4 movements our 2024 Democracy Courage tributes this year. And at the Global Assembly, we're giving out these global Democracy Courage tributes. Now, Democracy Courage tributes are the things that we usually give out to the movements, collective efforts of individuals, individual entities, not the individual efforts of individuals or efforts of individual entities. It is a collective efforts, movements that we like to recognize. In the past, we actually gave courage tribute to photojournalist groups in the Philippines who are capturing extrajudicial killing. We also gave courage tribute to independent journalists in MENA region, particularly in Syria and Egypt. Sudanese Resistance Committee, as a collective movement, we gave courage tribute to them. We also gave courage tribute to advocates of rule of law in Africa, received by Madame Tuli Madonsela. These are the people that we recognize their courage. We recognize their courage. And this year, we'd like to announce 4 movements. 1, Palestinian civil society groups. They have gone through so many difficult moments this year, last year, and so many years before. Ugandan LGBTIQ movement. Venezuelan pro-democracy movement. And then finally, Ukrainian civil society. So those are the 4 movements that come together at the Global Assembly, and the steering committee of the World Movement will present a Democracy Courage tribute. So I hope you will join us to express your solidarity, our solidarity together with those courageous individuals and the movements. Now, I did mention earlier that we are building the Global Assembly agenda in the 3 pillars, with the 3 pillars. We're talking about expanding civic space, political space. How do we create the pro-democracy narrative? And then how can we outsmart autocrats? And we do so through the plenary sessions and workshops, but also bringing activism and excursion that we take non-South African participants into places like Constitutional Hill, where we sit today, or Apartheid Museum, or Lilies Leaf, so that people can actually interact with South African historical moments. Some of the workshops will be focusing on the big moments that we had this year. Nishan mentioned something coming up in November, which is the elections in the US. In fact, the 2024 is one of the biggest election year of the world. So we have seen over 60 countries have gone through the election. We come at the end of the year to assess how the election went, how the democracies were protected or affected. And part of the conversation is about how the AI, social media, technologies are influencing democratic processes like elections. So we'll have some conversation around that. But ultimately, yes, we're trying to figure out how do we expand the political space, which South Africa has been inspiring some innovations around. How do we win back the public trust? Because democracy is losing public trust, as Nishan and many others mentioned here today. And how do we bring democracy back to community? Again, it's part of the building narrative, and how do we bring back public trust? So these are the things that we see. We look to South Africa to share the inspiration with us. By hope, we are bringing some inspiration from Latin America, Middle East, Asia, Eurasia, so that we can engage very practical conversation with South Africans, and so that we can continue to build democracy around the world, making sure that democratic future is protected. So this is what we wanted to come to announce. We are coming back in November 20th through 22nd. 500 people from 100 different countries will be with you, celebrating 30 years of democracy and democracy today in South Africa. And I hope all of you can come and join us. Thank you very much.